Hello and welcome to Manufacturing.net's Security Breach. I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. I'm joined today by Theo Zafirakos, the Chief Information Security Officer at Terranova Security. Terranova recently published data indicating that the success of phishing schemes continues to escalate. The growing number of remote workers, combined with the amount of personal and enterprise-level data that can be obtained, makes the industrial sector an increasingly appealing target. Going forward, the security firm feels that the industrial sector will need to do more to increase worker awareness of these attacks in understanding how to respond, or more importantly, how not to react to the messages these attackers use. Theo, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time. Maybe to start out, you can tell us a little bit about these phishing attacks, where they got going, and why they're such a preferred tactic for some of these cyber terrorists.
Sure, no problem. And for those who can remember, phishing attacks started back in the mid-90s with America Online. And those were the first scenarios of phishing attacks that we saw. And over the years, the phishing attacks have evolved because they've become lucrative over time. So a lot of organizations have invested in technology to protect their environment, but may not have invested enough on user awareness. So cyber criminals are now targeting end users because they know that they're often the vulnerability within a system or within a user's organization.
So what makes we've seen in a previous episode of Security Breach, we talked about a phishing attack that was stopped. There were security measures in place that made sure this didn't come to fruition. But what makes the industrial sector in particular so attractive to some of these phishing schemes?
And any organization that is in an operational environment where the users are constantly being productive and keeping up the business and running have less time to participate to those training activities and training sessions. They don't have a lot of idle time. So it's more difficult for organizations to train those employees because it's more difficult to set time away from your day-to-day job to go complete the training. So that's one of the factors that I guess affects those organizations more. Anyone in an operation environment has to take the time to allocate their users sufficient time to complete the training so they know the threats that may be exposed to on their day-to-day. Also, in the recent years, a lot of organizations, especially industrial manufacturing, have digitized a lot of their activities. So everything that we do now requires a computer or requires someone sitting in front of a computer. So users are exposed to a lot more threats than they were in the past.
Excellent. And I think when we think of phishing schemes, it seems so simple, right? You get an email that you don't recognize. There's a link in there. You shouldn't click on it. But you guys actually did some really interesting research. You recently published the Terranova Security Phishing Benchmark Global Report, as well as you did something called a Gone Phishing Tournament. Maybe you can explain a little bit about the report and some of the things you found out, as well as what this tournament was really about.
Yes, and to understand how phishing works is that you have to remember that if we present a user a phishing email and we ask them, is this phishing or not? They will say yes, because they're being asked, and then they will look at the indicators to identify that it's a phish. But in our day-to-day environment, when we're busy trying to respond, multitask, we don't pay as much attention. So we tend to click much easier. And that's what this Gone Phishing Tournament was doing, was test that behavior in a live environment. So basically, this is the third edition of the Gone Phishing Tournament, where we invite organizations across the globe, not just our clients, to participate in this tournament. The tournament provides security leaders some benchmark data based on their location, their industry, their size, and whether they have a program in place or not. And it compares them to others who will be submitted to exactly the same scenario. Right now, so we're comparing apples to apples, right? So it's the same. So this scenario was leveraging the current work environment with a lot of users working remotely or in a hybrid environment and using collaboration tools. So it was relevant to a lot of users' work environment. So our tendency to respond, click, and act is much higher. And that's why we saw a very high click rate.
Interesting. Obviously, you have a very vested interest in cybersecurity. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more just about Terranova, the company, and the work that you guys do.
Yes, so Terranova has been in business for over 20 years. Our president and CEO, Luis Lapuente, was a visionary 20 years ago to implement the first cybersecurity awareness training where it did not exist. Ever since then, we've trained millions of users across 200 countries in over 40 different languages. We leverage high quality awareness material combined with phishing simulations to provide organizations the best recipe for succeeding and educating their users against this ongoing threat.
Excellent. So, I think one of the things that's interesting from our perspective is how these attacks have changed. In the past, it was kind of easy to identify something that didn't look legitimate, didn't look right, but we've seen these phishing attacks really evolve. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the new tactics that you've seen that are being used and some of the strategies that you're helping companies to develop to guard against these new phishing attacks.
Yeah, so the phishing attacks have evolved to become a lot more sophisticated and a lot more tailored to the users and targeted. We tell, organizations tend to tell employees, do not click on suspicious link. Well, what exactly is a suspicious link, right? We have to get that to specific, but without being too technical, so users understand. The same thing about phishing websites. We tell users not to submit credentials or click and download documents from suspicious websites. What exactly makes a website suspicious? So we have to train users to look at those elements. Look at the address, the email address. Look at the URL address of the website you're visiting. Right? If it's clearly indicated not secure or the HTTPS or the padlock is missing, well, do not proceed with taking any action to that website. So we have to become very specific, but at the same time keep it simple. And that's what we do with our awareness programs and strategies. We deliver the key message and the key behaviors that users need to improve in a simple language that's easy to understand. The key also is to do it in a repetitive manner, because doing it once, users will forget about 5 or 6 days later, right? Yeah. Because they're not, our technology works well, they'll stop the majority of the phishing. But the 1 or 2 that make it through, we want them to act securely as second nature. Almost like, right now we become second nature. We walk in our car, we put on our seatbelts because we know it's going to protect our lives. Sometimes we'll do it because we don't want to get a ticket. Either way, we are somehow motivated to do the right thing. So we have to take the same approach with phishing. Keep repeating the message, make it specific yet simple to understand.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit on a great point there, how much more customized these messages are becoming from these bad actors. The couple of stats that stood out to me in the report, about 20% of those who received the email, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but they actually clicked on a link within the phishing email. And then of those that clicked, 70% didn't recognize anything malicious about the website that they were taken to and downloaded information from that site. That's kind of mind-blowing. I know where you're talking about trying to keep this message simple and relevant to people, but are there things, different characteristics of either the email or these websites that you've noticed that can maybe raise just some immediate red flags and when people see them?
Yeah. And we have to start with the email, because as we could see, if users have confidence in the email sender, they will proceed through the whole scenario and act even on the website. So it starts with the email. So the best way to stop phishing is educating users how to detect it from the phishing message. And the key is to look at the address of the sender, and not just the description, but we look at the specific address that contains the @ sign. So we need to educate users on how to read sender address. Right. If you see an email that also talks about a topic that may not be relevant or specific to you, question it before you take any action.
Absolutely.
Then if those fail and you end up on the website, this is where we talk about the safety features that the browsers offer, right? You could clearly see whether the HTTPS is there to indicate a secure website or the padlock. It does not mean that if you see those elements, it's 100% secure, because cyber criminals could be using secure websites. But the absence of those elements, it automatically reassures you that this is not a secure website.
Yeah. And I think that really bleeds into a lot of the spoofing schemes that we've seen going on. People trying to use an email address like FedEx or Amazon or USPS to try to get people to click on links and see about a package that was supposed to be delivered or something like that. So absolutely.
Yeah, and you have to look at for those elements. Is there any characters that have been replaced within the address? Is there any additional words that have been added to the address? If I'm getting FedEx, but the sender is Google, well, does this make sense?
Absolutely. Good point. I think one of the things, you keep talking about training and keeping people up to speed on what to look for. I think there's a lot of folks in the industrial sector who are championing the need for this training and other security investments on an IT level, but they keep hitting some of these obstacles in terms of where companies want to invest money. If somebody's a champion for making investments in cybersecurity, but they're hitting some of these obstacles in terms of getting those funds, could you offer them any advice in terms of tactics and maybe how to sell this as they move up the food chain, so to speak?
Yes. So any organization nowadays will have an information security program. And you have to align your security awareness program with the strategic objectives of your corporate security program. Show how information security awareness supports the people aspect of security. Yes, we'll have processes in place and we'll have technology in place, but we rely on people to implement and use those processes and technology. So let's teach them on how to do it securely. So by aligning your objectives of your security program to your corporate security objectives, then you'll be able to demonstrate that there is value and there is a return of investment. The other thing is you just have to look at what is happening in the wild, right? How many organizations are affected by cybersecurity and how many of these breaches occur due to human mistakes or accidents, right? So you need to take on that responsibility that if I do give a technology tool to my employees, I have the responsibility to teach them on how to use the tool and the risks associated. So, and I'm sure manufacturing and operations organizations understand what it means to use tools and technology safely and securely.
No, great points. One of the things too, you mentioned the human factor. It's such a big part in all this, and people sometimes underestimate how big of a role the individual has. They're thinking about cybersecurity and all these hackers as being more of a technical thing, but it really does come back to that human element and understanding. Last question I have for you, Theo, just kind of get your perspective. I know we've been talking about phishing schemes, but another big issue for the industrial sector, especially here in the US, have been ransomware attacks. We've seen it in Colonial Pipeline. We've seen it in some other places. Just want to get your feedback here. Do you have a thought or an opinion in terms of when those attackers come looking for that ransom to pay out? What is your thought there in terms, should industrial firms be paying that ransom? Should they try not to? Do you have any thoughts there?
Well, definitely they should not be paying the ransom because any money that is obtained through those means will be used to fund other criminal activities or other attacks. So you're just making the attackers stronger. We encourage organizations to invest to protect themselves against those attacks. And that investment requires both in the technology aspect and the people aspect. So making sure that you have the required technical controls in place to be able to restore operations in a reasonable time frame. Make sure you test those recovery procedures, but at the same, educate your users so you don't have to trigger your incident response. So it takes both elements.
Thanks again to Theo Zafirakos for joining us today. That's going to wrap it up for this episode of Security Breach. I'm Jeff Ranke. Thanks for joining us.